Hey, welcome back to the Métropole Grid. My name is Andre. Thanks so much for tuning in. As expected, it is September 17th, so this morning we have just received the standard ban list 2510. A new ban list in Netrunner for the standard format that will be in play for the upcoming World Championship in Edinburgh in just a month. Now in this video, we'll be talking about this whole ban list, but really quickly at the top, let's just dive into the 4 cards that are on this ban list. We have 1 unbanned card and 3 banned cards. Unbanned, we have the runner card Creative Commission from System Gateway. It was banned out earlier this year. It was banned for about 6 months. It's coming off that list. And now 3 cards are being added to the ban list, all Corp cards. We have Sting, the 3-1 Jinteki agenda from the Ashes cycle that does some amount of net damage. We have Cybersand Harvester, a Wayland asset that not a lot of folks know the whole text on. It's exclusively played in AWP Super Heavy Logistics. It's been popping off this year. And finally, we have Touch-Ups, the NBN operation, and the first card from Elevation to hit the ban list. All 3 of these cards are banned alongside Creative Commission coming off the list. And this is what we're looking for, again, for Worlds 2025. Ban list becomes active on October 3rd, so in just 2 weeks, it'll be safely in play for Worlds. And today in this video, we're going to be talking about this article and talking about the changes and what we expect Worlds to look like and what we think this means for the meta. If you want to do your own reading, we're not going to be reading this word for word, but this article should be online on Null Signal Games' website. If I've done my job right, it'll be linked in the description. And speaking of Null Signal Games, huge shout out for sending this out ahead of time to content creators like myself so we can make content like this that drops right alongside in the morning. Super appreciated. Thanks so much, NSG. Speaking about super appreciated, before we dive into the video itself, if you just want to take a second to hit a like on the YouTube video, I promise you it helps a heck of a lot. And with that, otherwise, let's talk about this ban list. So this year was a really important and a really fascinating year when it came to Netrunner organized play. When it comes to the standard format, this was the year that all the old Fantasy Flight Games cards left the standard format, and currently we're in a Null Signal Games only standard format. In terms of side balance, the expected result of losing all these FFG cards was that corporations were losing way more powerful cards than runners were. So the expectation was when Elevation was released and FFG cards left, that corporations would be on the back foot. So at the beginning of the year, when Elevation released, alongside that, we got the 2504 ban list, which is the ban list that specifically targeted out 5 very powerful runner cards. Even before the set was out, the ban team said, hey, these are 5 cards we think need to go just to give corporations a chance, knowing they're going to lose a lot of their strong stuff. And the results were not exactly perfect. This page is a website called The Maker's Eye. I'll link it into the description. It's a fantastic website for collating data when it comes to organized play. This is the chart that shows you the corporation versus runner win rate, specifically during the 2504 meta, so earlier this year, but also particularly looking at top cut games. So the highest ranking player is playing an open deck list. It's definitely its own interesting data point, but this is a very weird data point where runners are winning 60% of the time in open top cuts. This is kind of what people expected, that corporations would be very much on the back foot, and it seemed with even the 2504 ban list, that was not enough to help. And so we got another ban list, and this was the 2508 ban list. It dropped just in August. Mind you, we're just coming out of this really short meta of about a month. But this ban list dropped right before the Continentals season, which was 6 major tournaments between August to September. And this continued to ban out some really powerful runner cards. 3 really strong runner cards and 1 corporation powerful card was also unbanned. This was hopefully going to tip the balance more towards corporations, and lo and behold, it actually worked. It worked surprisingly well. This is the current at the end of 2508. Corp versus runner win rate. Corp is at a 52%, which I do think most people favor a slight Corp meta over a runner meta. This is for all games, mind you, not just Top Cut. Top Cut looks just about the same. But things are interesting. That actually was a pretty big ban list coming into the Continental season. And the article goes on to talk about this. It discusses the sort of evolution we saw across these 6 major tournaments across about 6 weeks. And seeing from week to week what players were bringing and how the meta evolved, I think it was actually quite a success. At the beginning of Continentals, we saw a lot of the remnants of the 2504 meta where you're expecting things like a lot of Alco. This is, mind you, the APAC Continentals in person, which is a massive event, but you saw a lot of Alcos. Nebula is doing quite well. On the runner side, Sable still seems like the best, even though she was targeted out. Then we move on to America's Continentals. Again, there was 3 Continentals in person, 3 online, and here things are actually widening up a fair bit. While PD ended up taking the event, a really interesting PD list, we're starting to see like corporations scoring out in remote servers. LEO construction is doing well. we're also starting to see a bit of these op decks. And these op decks became really important for the next couple weeks on online Continentals. So EMEA online Continentals, the op decks are back. You see Moosely Hot taking the event as well, and you see an interesting spread of some shapers. And then when we go to America's Continentals, it's a different op deck, and then we see Hoshiko and Anarchs taking the title there. So it's opening up, which is kind of fascinating. This 2508 ban list so far has been pretty cool. Continental season was more diverse than I think we thought. And again, I want to shout out, we're in the smallest card pool we've been in a really long time. 550 cards, as opposed to just a couple months ago, the nearly 1,000 cards. It's a world of difference. And still you're seeing a lot of diversity between decks. It's a nice place to be. And the article directly calls us out, the 2508 meta. We knew that the update was heading in the right direction, but the resulting meta was even better than we hoped. Very cool. And that leads us to right now, where the standard balance team has looked at all the Continentals data, and now in the next month we have the World Championship. What are they to do? It's a really hard task for sure, but they've done their testing and they come up with these like 4 major points of what they've decided to do, and that's what we're talking about today. Again, 1 card unbanned on the runner side, 3 corporation cards banned, and this is how they got to the results. All right, first thing at the top here, they're talking about the Shaper faction. Out of all 3 runner factions, the Shaper faction was the least represented across almost the entirety of the year, but at least all Continentals. And you can see these results. This is from 2508 meta, again, a very short meta, about a month, but there is more Sable players than the entire Shaper faction largely. Technically, there's more Sable players than every other faction, but Shaper was definitely the least represented. And they're calling out at specific tournaments, the Shaper was actually just really struggling. The America's Online Continentals, this is the Shaper win rate chart. So let's just cut out cut conversion. But 50% is this middle line here, and no Shaper is getting there. So they're really, really struggling, it seems. I want to say on a wider field, when it comes to the 2508 meta, not just America's Continentals, Shaper honestly didn't do too bad. These are identity win rates. The green dots, if you see color, are the Shaper lists, and Arasana is technically the second winningest runner at 52%. Not a huge number, but that's still pretty good. And we have Lat at 50%. Of course, if you compare that to Sable, that has about 3 to 4 times as many games played, it's not the biggest data point, but I don't think Shaper is the worst thing, but it was definitely the least representative thing, and it seemed like the underdog across the entirety of this last month. So what did they want to do to address Shaper? They specifically said in this article, one of the problems that Shaper has right now is dealing with some early, scrappy, high to trash cost assets. Right now in the meta, and we're looking at things like Auco, and we're looking at things like Op, and we'll be talking about those for sure later in this video. A lot of the times there's problems that the corporation can put on the table as soon as turn 1 that you need to address. And Shaper, the way that Shaper works, they're not very good at addressing those problems all the time too quickly. This is Bladderwort, a card that gets mentioned a lot in this article. It's a very important card in the meta. And if this thing hits the table in an Op, in an Auco, it needs to go down for 3 credits. And Shaper as a faction, that's not that easy. If we look at other factions like Criminal, they have a lot of burst money. They have a lot of ways to make money while interacting, while Shaper is kind of built entirely differently. These are a lot of the Shaper cards in the game that give you economy, and very few of them are super straightforward. They usually require building an engine, setting it up, and being multi-card combos. They're about planning and foresight and future. And so having a thing you have to deal with as soon as turn 1, barring getting down your Azimuth, can be a big issue. And so they've decided to give Shaper this sort of very obvious punchy econ card that can be played as soon as turn 1. And this is Creative Commission. This card was a massive staple. Since it came out, it's been a 3 of in basically every Shaper list we've seen to date until it was banned earlier this year as a way to bring down all runners. And it looks like it's coming back. And this card, as simple as it is, adding 3 more sure gambles to any list, let alone a card that you can spend 3 credits trashing your Bladderwort, end your turn on 1 credit, last click, ideally you're playing this, you're back up to 5. That's a huge deal. That gives you liquidity, that allows you to go faster, that allows you to set up, and it makes it less difficult to manage your economy. This is one of the great recovery cards. It doesn't matter what you did. It's very easy to get a credit and then go up to 5. This also works really well, just in general with a lot of the Shaper card pool. Things like Lilypad or Onicom or any of these consoles, they're really expensive to get down. They're good value propositions over a longer game, but now you can Lilypad on turn 1, get down your Creative Commission and recover. It feels really quite good. Things like environmental testing. This is a very important Shaper economy card. Well, I don't think Shaper economy engines are that diverse. A lot of them are just install things. Maybe just having another event, as much as it makes environmental testing an easier pill to swallow in the early game, maybe we can play Onicom again. I'm not 100% sure, but I cannot understate that Creative Commission is a very powerful tool in Shaper decks, and it makes a lot of the different Shaper playstyles easier to manage. Now, I think overall, this actually puts Shaper in a very interesting place going into Worlds. SBT really wanted to push Shaper up, and I think this is an easy way to do it. And I think it's up to a very creative, a very thoughtful deck builder to build something maybe surprising, build something flexible, build something that can deal with assets and Glacier. That is something that Shaper has classically been able to do. I also do want to emphasize that as much as the article says that Shaper has kind of been like not doing too well, Shaper has some of the stronger win rates. We have 2 identities at 50 plus, which for this meta is not bad at all. And just giving those decks more juice, I think they might not be in the worst spot at all. I expect to see a lot more green in Edinburgh, and I'm excited to see what those decks look like. Now, I do want to point out that when this card was banned out, the discussion was about this sort of economies that are hard to predict, this sort of like easy bounce back. There was a couple cards that were banned like this, cards that you could play on low credit thresholds. And the idea is that, oh, it's really frustrating when you play against a Shaper and then you think you got them down to 1 credit and suddenly next turn they're starting up on 5 credits. We'll see if that is an issue. That was a problem. I was actually kind of happy when Creative Commission was gone because it felt like a lot of Shaper decks did not have to manage their budget that strictly because they just had so much flexibility in that bounce back. We'll see if we get salty about it. But yeah, it's worth noting that this was deemed a problem at some point. We'll obviously see if that's the case in just the next couple weeks. All right, that's Shaper. So we got the 1 card unbanned and now we have some bans, and all these bans address the corp side, which is interesting because I think a lot of people that I've talked to don't think that corporations feel that powerful compared to runners. This is something that's addressed at the end of the article. I do think the SBT team is aware of this, but I do think these changes are maybe meant to encourage some diversity across decks and make it not so much that there's obviously like 2 best decks you should be playing at Worlds. I don't know. We'll see if this actually shifts the win rate back to runner side. It's going to be hard to tell. I've done obviously no testing so far, but it is worth noting that I don't know when I play Corp if I feel super powerful, and we're losing 3 very powerful Corp cards. Now, the first issue that we talk about here is the Alco issue, which has been such a big deal this year. This is one of the 2 Jinteki identities, functionally the only Jinteki identity that came out in Elevation if you play Standard. It's the 45-15 that draws sometimes 3 to 4 cards at the beginning of your turn, as long as you're discarding cards or doing damage. And you probably know the text on Alco because there's no way you haven't been playing against this for the majority of your games on JNet Casual. This year, Alco is so damn good. Not only is it so damn good, it's so damn popular. This is the corp representation for the entirety of the 2508 ban list. Again, mostly Continental season. Alco is a quarter of the field. There's more people playing Alco than entire factions. We see this across Sable. We saw this across Alco. It's the same thing, except not only is Alco the most popular, it's the most winningest corp. 60% is buck wild. Generally, there's this idea of self-correction. The more people playing something, the more that deck gets closer towards the average win rate. But this is still super prominent and still doing really dang well. People are attacking for it, but still 60% win rate is buck wild. And so clearly, Alco, something had to be done. But what do you do? Alco has been so difficult. The text on this identity is so strong. Now, over the last, we've had Alco for 5 months now, give or take. We've seen many different archetypes competing at the highest level of play. Whether it's a sort of Oppo Research end of the line fork decks out of Alco, that's been really good early. It's still really good right now. We're seeing the sort of HB-esque efficiency versions playing good ice. We've seen fully operational. We've seen Alco decks that are full trap kill combos, Reaper function. I've seen complete image. This one's playing touch-ups. We've seen Alcos that are full asset grinder, hostile architecture on top of Bladderworts. That was really popular early. We have Holloman for fast advance. The idea is there are so many things you can do with Alco, and we have not even seen them all. So the standard banlist team is in this weird spot. How do you address Alco when it seems so powerful and so flexible? And what you might see as I've gone through all these lists, there's a bunch of cards that are just staple cards where functionally no matter what Alco is doing, you'll see the same cards. And these cards came up in the conversation as targets to ban. And they actually ended up banning a target that didn't seem like the obvious choice for me, but I think makes a lot of sense because it's one of the cards that actually is very integral to the power level of all the other powerful cards. And that card is Sting. That's this agenda. It's a 3/1. It's just banned out. It does some amount of net damage. It's X, which X is +1. I don't know. A lot of times I have to keep reading this card, and I've seen this card for many, many years now. I'm still reading the text. But the short of the long is that this is a small agenda that does a bit of damage. If the runner touches it, if you score it out, it's adding threat on different angles. And the way that Sting is so important is that it interacts with so many of the other very powerful cards that are ubiquitous across the Alco staples. We're talking about cards like Moonpool, a fast advance recursion piece that can move your agendas around and requires you to be playing more agendas. The more agendas you have, the more likely this is to fire. So taking a 3/1 out of the deck removes 3 small agendas. That actually hurts Moonpool pretty considerably. We have cards like Regenesis, and Regenesis is a very powerful, another small agenda. But the power of Regenesis is by putting agendas in your archives. And the idea is that if you put things like a Fuji in archives alongside the stings, it now becomes very difficult and very soon lethal to check archives. So removing stings from the card pool makes it a lot easier to check archives, so the threat of Regenesis is not as strong. Similar idea with Moonpool tool. If you can flush out the Moonpools by running archives, it's a lot safer. We also have Cohort Guidance Program, which is the exact same idea. Very powerful card, both to enable AUCO, but also to get those advancements to score out cards and do tricks. And now it's easier to run archives to diffuse the issue. It's neat. This one card, Sting, is a way to deal with all these other cards and bring them all down a peg. And I think that kind of makes sense. I'm excited to see it. I do need a shout out here that actually this is one of the bans I'm the most bummed about, and it's nothing to do with balance of the game, but a couple of weeks ago, we just got the Sting out for our America's Continentals. This was a prize support that everyone got for participation. Scott Uminga does not miss. And unfortunately, this card has been standard legal for only a couple of weeks and now it's gone, which like really hurts because it turned out so well. But Sting it's gone. So the question is, what is this going to do to AUCO? And I'm not 100% sure. I think there's a chance you can play the same sort of lists. I don't think you're going to have as much burst damage. Again, checking archives will be easier for sure. But almost all the lists we looked at today, I think every single list is playing 3 stings because of the way it works with things. What do you do with the slot? I honestly don't know. And I think you can take these lists, and a lot of people will take these lists and do very simple changes. Whether you want to play some more hybrid releases, these showed up every once in a while, and play some more of the when agendas are scored tempo cards. I think that could make some sense. Hybrid release is technically a pretty cromulent AUCO card. You have face down cards in archives. I worry about this. There must be a world where we just swap this in with False Lead and make it even more cursed with Oppo researches, but I think there's a big chance that having the small 3-1 agendas is really important for all those power points, that maybe this deck is going to look very different than it did. And this gets shouted out in the article later, is that that's one of the weird things about AUCO, is that ability is so powerful that even if you banned out Moonpool, even if you said the sort of AUCO Oppo research kill decks didn't exist, I have no doubt you can build a deck that does something in the identity that looks totally different. It's very flexible. It's very powerful. As long as you're doing net damage, as long as you're playing some of those power cards like FUT or Bladderwort or what have you, there will be a deck there. So I'm pretty sure we're going to see AUCO at Worlds. Will they all be the same build? Will it all be different builds? I think we have a couple weeks to test that, but it's really interesting to see how that standard balance team wanted to address the AUCO issue, because it's clearly one of the overperforming decks, both in popularity and win rate. I need to get some more testing in, but I think a lot of people will be happy if they're seeing less AUCO across the table. Next up, another ban, and a weird one too, since it's Globe, thanks to the Elevation rules update. I don't think I've ever seen a card banned because of a rules update, and that's functionally what we're getting at here. This is Cybersand Harvester. It's a card that if you asked 6 months ago, what's the text on this card, a lot of people couldn't tell you because it saw literally 0 play. But what happened, the short of the long is when Elevation entered and we had that big rotation, alongside that, there was an update to the rules of the game. So OP, it's very important, I guess we talk about OP first. OP is the Wayland identity from Borealis, which Cybersand Harvester is meant to functionally be an OP card. OP says that once a turn, when you trash one of your installed resed cards, you can go search R&D for a card that costs exactly 1 less, install and res that for free. So the idea is that if you're Cybersand Harvester, if you can crack this, you get an immediate speed, go get a 1-coster from your deck. And that's exactly what's happening here, and it's very, very good. However, when this came out, when Borealis came out, the card was balanced around this idea called no change in game state. This is a holdover from old Fantasy Flight Games Netrunner all the way back for a decade now. And that rule said that you cannot do an effect unless the result of the effect changes the game state. It doesn't care about the cost of the effect, but if the result of the effect does not change the game state in any meaningful way, you cannot fire the ability. It's much more technical than that, but the short of the long is if Cybersand Harvester has no credits on it, you cannot trash it because there's no credits to take. You're not changing game state. I know it gets trashed, but that's not the point. Now, for a while, NSG has been working to get away from NSIGs, this no change in game state, and come around Elevation, they finally did it. They have enacted full NSIGs reform. Now, some cards were errata to make them make more sense, but now without this N6 rule, you can go ahead and crack a Cybersand Harvester at instant speed whenever you want, regardless whether there's credits on this or not. And that made this card suddenly go from unplayable in the standard competitive format to 3 of in every op deck. It's absurd. Because this card, if the runner runs and hits it, they have to trash it for 4 credits. And if not, you would just res this on their turn, fire op on their turn, and go get your favorite 1-coster from your deck onto the table ready for the start of turn ability. And there's really good 1-costers. Whether it's Bladderwort, which we've already talked about before being super important, getting cards out of hand, getting some money, Whether it's the more efficiency angle of humanoid resources, ensuring this hits the table, and then you can draw more cards and have more credits and set up more stuff for op, another Cybersand Harvester. Whether it's FUT to set up some kill combos, there is just so many very powerful one-cost cards. As much as these are mostly assets, that's usually what's being used for. It was a very reliable tool to give consistency. Shout out to Tech Startup. This is what we used to play many moons ago. This is not at all what Cybersand Harvester does, but the difference between a 4 trash cost at immediate speed that can just end runs when you clean getaway it and the server disappears. It's wild. This was such a good card for op. And we saw that the last Continentals op has been sweeping them. While we saw some op representation in the earlier Continentals, this is Augie's list that won the online America's Continentals. And it's just an efficiency list. 3 Cybersand Harvesters grabbing those humanoid resources, and we're off to the races. Just to show you, this is the finals between Sokka and Augustus, and this is the end of turn 4. Augustus Caesar has to discard down from 8 cards in hand, has 24 credits and 9 cards on the table. This is turn 4. This was a wild blowout, but like this is what can happen with sub consistency, and it was buck wild to watch. Hopefully I've linked to this in the description. On the other side, we have the big unit playing Op as Mother. This is the sort of like Tuno-esque damage op deck. Same idea, grabbing your Bladderwords, grabbing your Futs. This is just putting more things on the table faster and being that toolbox being consistent. Op is really, really strong. And as a result, to deal with this deck that seems like it was very much the best deck in the format, as much as it's maybe harder to pilot, arguably, than Aoko, and it's not as popular. I do think if there's no changes, and the standard balance team does think if there's no changes, that this would be the deck to beat at Worlds, and they want to shake that up a fair bit. They also said that specifically Op is such a powerful ability that they're not super worried that banning a Cybersand Harvester is going to destroy Op, because it always takes just interesting deck builders, interesting pilots to make Op super relevant. I think rig shooting might look a bit interesting come Worlds. We're going to see what the meta looks like for sure, but I do think we're definitely going to see some op decks at Worlds. I think they're going to lose a bit of that flexibility, a bit of that toolbox. Maybe that's exactly what makes Op exciting, but I have no doubt we're still going to see some big ship. I also want to shout out in terms of card design, Op inherently restricts what sort of cards that null signal games can print, because any card that can be trashed at instant speed with a trash cost opens up a whole can of worms of consistency and combos that you can do. And losing Cybersand Harvester actually makes it probably a lot easier, where if Cybersand existed and Op exists in the standard format, for the rest of the time that these cards are legal, it's really hard to print powerful one-costers, and so this will actually open the game up. If you've ever played the Eternal format, and these cards were never legal together in standard, you can fire Markiel to grab a 0-coster from your deck at instant speed, and that is just very, very powerful in the game. So this sort of stuff just restricts design, and I think this will open up design in the long run. Finally, while Op and Aoko, most represented decks, there's another deck they wanted to target out. And this, I think, is the happiest part of this ban list, specifically for me. They wanted to do something about Nebula. And I'll be honest, Nebula is my least favorite part of Elevation. My least favorite part of Netrunner this year is this one identity. It is the NBN flip identity, the only NBN identity I think you've seen from Elevation. Frontside says when you play an operation, gain a credit flip. Backside says when you play an operation, gain a click. And then the runner can flip this back if they're running R&D or HQ successfully. And these decks are really good. We saw this as soon as day one in early tournaments, where there's these decks that just ice up R&D, ice up HQ. They don't build remote servers, and then they play nano managements and just score points from hand. And that's the whole game. Slot machine on centrals, force you to run every turn. And if not, they're scoring out from hand, generally credit positively half the time. And that was okay, I guess. Not my favorite Netrunner. And then things got a bit cursed around a false lead. And if you haven't seen these decks, a lot of strong players are playing this deck. It did win a Continentals. A false lead is this neutral 3-1 that when you score it out for hopefully 1 credit, it fast advance straight from hand without interaction if you're playing and you're flipped into Gemelang. This, you can instant speed, forfeit this agenda between the runner's second and third click. They have 2 clicks left over and their turn will end. Heaven forbid if you score 2 false leads, that means the runner's turn can start and you can take away their whole turn. They lose 2 clicks, go to discard or whatever you need to do. And this is an issue in NBN specifically that can score this reliably on top of something like an Opera Research. Opera Research can give the runner either 2 or 4 tags, and if the runner has 2 fewer or 4 fewer clicks on their turn, it turns out they're going to be floating those tags. And that very easily gets to be a lethal problem with multiple cards like End of the Line and other damage cards in the deck. That is largely what the modern Nebula deck is doing. And the standard balance team are very clear that this does not pass whatever requirements for interesting interactive Netrunner. And I love them for that. I really don't enjoy this deck at all, but this is what we're looking at. 3 End of the Lines, ice up only centrals. You sometimes do bluff and put things on the table, but if it draws well, it's kind of unbeatable. And it's very much about runner tech and getting lucky and not hitting beholds. Sometimes it does make interesting games, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely my least favorite part of Standard right now. And it looks like the Standard Balance team kind of agrees. So how do they want to deal with this? They actually targeted at a card that is another kind of divisive card. Another card, I'll be honest, I never cared for in Elevation, but it's touch-ups. This is the first card from Elevation to get banned. It's a double that places 2 advancement counters on an installed card. Now, that alone, being an operation, means that if you're flipped into Gemlang, if you install an agenda, you play touch-ups, you get 2 advancements on it, you get a click back. And then with your last final action, you can put the 3rd advancement using the basic action. And so with touch-ups, you can fast advance out a 3-2 or a 3-1 agenda. On top of that, touch-ups looks at your opponent's hand and you name a type first, and then you can remove 2 cards of that type and shuffle them into their deck. So not only is it fast advance, not only do you get information what's in their hand, but you also get cards out of their hand, which can loosen them up for some damage combos, which was pretty common in the format. Again, not a huge fan of this. Elevation cards were generally, I think, meant to be a bit elegant, and this card literally does everything. It's super overloaded and very frustrating, I think, on either side of the table when this happens. So the reason they mentioned banning touch-ups specifically is that this removes one of the in-faction ways that you have access to fast advance while playing Nebula. And so if you want to score your agendas from hand without building a remote server, you actually have to start to spend influence. And while nano management is for influence, I'm not expecting to see that. I do think a lot of these decks will still try to play this combo deck, but now they'll have to play maybe 1 fewer copy of something like End of the Line and instead spend influence on other options. Business as usual, I believe, is the cheapest way to fast advance if you're flipped into Gemlang, on top of things like petty cash, of course. But this might be a change, and we'll see if it makes sense. Now, touch-ups on top of being a fast advance option is also very important as a kill option. One of the big ways an entire faction does not die to damage combos is Steel Skin Scarring. If this gets trashed by the first End of the Line when you take the meat damage, it'll replace itself, and you can be maybe with 5 cards in hand after that and survive the second End of the Line. And that was a really big reason why touch-ups was so powerful, because when touch-ups reveals the hand, you can shuffle those Steel Skin Scarrings out of the runner's hand back into their deck. Now they're left with 3 cards in hand, and this ability doesn't fire because it wasn't trashed. So with 3 cards in hand, you just do the End of the Line. And so losing the ability to beat Steel Skin Scarring flat out, not only in NBN, but in the entire format, if I'm not mistaken, actually will matter a lot. So it's a fair bit harder to get those flat lines, and maybe you'll need less extra tech in these Anarch decks. I still want to say, just like every other corporation we talked about today, is that Nebula is still a very powerful ability. And so I do think there are maybe some build a remote server Nebula decks. There can be some interesting things we haven't seen, but the Nebula decks we know are definitely going to be weaker for it. I think the pure fast advance decks might have a chance. We'll see if they don't get run down by criminals. Oh, I do also want to shout out things like the Pravdivos deck that we saw flatline people on turn 2. That's not going to happen anymore, which also love that. Cool. And that's NBN, and that's touch-ups, and that's all our bans. And so we have 3 bans here, each targeting one of the strongest decks across 3 of the major factions. I don't think any of these identities, any of these factions are totally dead in the water. But Alco, you're definitely having to consider your agenda suite, which is interesting. Op might be less consistent, so we'll see how those decks react, whether they move to rig shooting, they rush in a different way, they play more viruses to get 2-costers and do something cool. There's definitely options. And when it comes to Nebula, I hope nobody plays it, but honestly, you probably still can spend some extra influence. And maybe if people are expecting less Nebula, they'll naturally be less tech for it, and that might help you out. You probably will have a Steel Skin Scarring problem. You have to deal with that, of course, but I think they're interesting targeted bans. Now, they talk about other considerations, and these are always really fascinating because you can see what the Standard Balance team tested and what their priorities are. I want to give a huge shout out to the Standard Balance team, not only writing these articles and putting the time in, but also all the playtesters who put the games in to make sure that this makes sense and we'll have a fun world. Good work. Great stuff. That's a lot of work for sure. And so some of their other considerations, we want to talk about NBN Reality Plus, another banned card from System Gateway. And mostly this paragraph is talking about NBN because NBN is in a really sad state this year. And I don't expect NBN to be doing that much at Worlds outside of Nebula, unless potentially people can figure out how to make some nice acid decks out of Epiphany. This is this year, 2508. And if you look at NBN outside of Nebula, it's basically not a faction. There's more people playing Precision Design than the entirety of the rest of the NBN factions that are non-Nebula. And that's just going to be an issue. NBN just doesn't have a lot going on right now. They have a lot of kind of like dead identities. It's a thing that I think you need more cards in the card pool. To sort of resuscitate NBN, they were considering Reality Plus, the System Gateway 40 card minimum that gives tags for credits and cards. And they did say in testing that playing asset spam in NBN with the Reality Plus ability was just overpowering across most runners. And so they did not think that was appropriate. So it was tested. Whether Bologna could have been unbanned, I'm not 100% sure. That's also a tricky one. But I do not expect to see a lot of NBN at this World. So if you're an NBN fan, I apologize. Next up, they discussed moshing, which is an Anarch card that is kind of similar to Creative Commission. It was banned for the same sort of reasons earlier this year, not only to bring runners down so corporations have more room to breathe. This was one of these bounce back cards that runners can suddenly go from 0 credits up to 5 credits when they mosh away a strike fund. And that was deemed to be a bit of a problem when you can't tell that your runners reach from across the table. This card, I was hoping it would come back to some extent. They did some testing and found out it's still very quite powerful. My secret agenda was to hope that Hoshiko could get banned out. And so Anarch as a faction would have less card draw. And so then moshing could come back. Looks like Hoshiko wasn't considered. Hoshiko has a very good chance of winning Worlds once again. But yeah, no moshing. Anarch is going to look largely the same. I think the Anarch problem to me is mostly looking at elevation. We had 11 Anarch cards in elevation, and not a lot of them are impacting the standard meta in a super meaningful way. And I feel like maybe if we had less Hoshiko, I don't know if you're playing Topon, but I want some of the other cards to shine. But I think Companions and Hoshiko are still going to do something cool. And Seb, I want to shout out Seb actually is one of the highest win rate runners. And so a strong Seb player at Worlds is a good seat to sit in. Next up, Bladderwort. We've talked about this a fair bit. Also, an enemy comes up, but Bladderwort has shown up across many different factions, a lot of different decks and top performing decks, whether it's Op or Alco. This card is interesting. It's a fascinating card. I know a lot of people hate it. Taking damage, people don't like to do that. They have to deal with this. 3 trash cost is a lot in the modern meta. It used to be a bit less back in the day, but you're really feeling that 3 trash cost. I do think this card is interesting, and the standard balance team said that after testing this and removing it from Alco just kind of pushed in different directions. And that is, again, the resiliency, the powerful identity. They saw like big money Alco. Maybe you're resing Big Ice, playing the 3 Hanseis and 3 hedge funds now, and it just is a different deck. So they thought Bladderwort was fascinating. It has a really cool condition on it, but banning Bladderwort would also hurt things like Op, which they didn't exactly want to do, already banning Harvester, but also things like Thule and other interesting damage-based acid decks across, I'm assuming, HB and probably even NBN. Similarly, when it comes to Jinteki, Anemone, this is one of the on-res cards. It's so good in Alco because if you res this, you discard a card, that's an Alco counter. You do 2 net damage, that's an Alco counter. And the subroutine fires, that's a 3rd Alco counter. They talked about this card. It's a very powerful Alco card, and you're almost seeing it nowhere else. I think we're just beginning to see some other Jinteki decks in the standard format, some more Glacier decks, which is kind of fascinating. But this was deemed to be actually a really interesting skill testing Alco card. I do think the Alco games where Alco just doesn't get power counters because they can't get their Bladderworts on the table, the FUT doesn't stick, they kind of become non-games. And while I think people are happy beating Alco, having this interesting way to kind of kickstart and get the fuel going so Alco can start trashing cards so they can start getting more counters, I do think that makes the games more interesting. And it is a powerful card that people are playing around, but not, I think, warpingly powerful, interestingly powerful. I do want to shout out the meta we're in is really weird. I know at Montreal, the Continentals, there were multiple decks in the top cut that were playing 2, I think even sometimes 3 air blades. That is the modern meta right now, not only to deal with Anemone, but just net damage subroutines and some other additional on-encounter stuff. So I don't know if we're going to still see the air blades. I think if you're going to expect Alco, why not? It's one influence, but Anemone is going to continue to do some damage. Next up, False Lead. This is a bummer. Man, I was stoked for this thing to be banned out. This card has been around forever. This came out in the Genesis cycle. This has been around since 2012. And there's never been a deck with False Lead in it that's not just like hyper cursed, that creates these board states where it's like, okay, we're 1 Oppa research from the game straight being over. And I was really excited for that not to be the case at Worlds. But I do think we're going to see some powerful False Lead decks. There's kind of no way around it. Whether we're going to see it in Alco, whether we're going to see Nebula still exist the way it does, that is the big question mark. But the standard balance team shouted out the 3-1 agenda slot. And I do want to say, you don't see a lot of play across 3-1s. And I do think maybe the issue I have is a lot of the 3-1s are just like misery engines, things like Stegadon and aggressive trend setting and False Lead. Like, I'd rather have some more on tempo stuff, but it's hard. It's just a bad ratio of advancements to card slots to agenda points. It's obviously they have to be very powerful effects, but we're going to see some 3-1s. We lost Sting, but False Lead probably will still see some play. It's still holding on. It's frustrating. It's been so long that we've had to play around this thing. And then finally, Sable. And this actually might be one of the biggest notes, and it's kind of, I wouldn't say buried here, but it's at the end. The short of the long is Sable is incredibly prominent, incredibly powerful, incredibly successful this last entire year, even in the 2408 ban list, while Sable was specifically targeted with a ban in 2408. Sable, criminal, basic, good, clean Netrunner play, gets that click back if you run randomly the mark, which is a central server at the top of the turn is decided. And in the 2408 ban list, to address specifically Sable, Info Bounty was banned out, which is largely a Sable only card that did remove a fair bit of credits from Sable's deck, but Sable is still quite performant. This is the win rate across runners, and this was shouted out in the article. While Sable is showing up as the most prominent runner, in fact, there's more Sable players than entire factions, the most prominent runner by a mile in 2408. Sable still has a really good win rate of 51%. That's not bad. And specifically, the more people playing the same identity, usually the win rate goes down just because more people are in on it. So it gets closer to the average. But what the article calls out is that Sable was actually slightly eclipsed in the last couple tournaments by people playing Moosely Hot, one of the new runners from Elevation that gets free card draw if you're drawing icebreakers or run events. And while Moosely Hot has way fewer games logged, Moosely Hot's win rate is technically higher. And specifically at the America's Continentals, Moosely Hot had a 51% win rate, while Sable was actually kind of struggling at 44, which is surprising, as much as corporations can largely target Sable because Sable is nearly a quarter of all games getting played. Now, I still expect to see a lot of Sable at Worlds, but I think the standard balance team was hoping that more players would move off of Sable and maybe try Moosely Hot, so it seems less homogenous to some extent. They do mention that this was a hard problem to fix, and while they considered ban candidates to give criminals a small nerf, they just could not figure something that would not destabilize the meta in ways they could not predict. So I do think the rest of the meta changing might impact Sable either positively, honestly. I don't 100% know on this, but Sable doesn't seem to be directly addressed, and it seemed like they couldn't figure that exactly out. Again, I'm not saying that like I know better, that's for sure, but it is worth noting that the Sable issue was just like a hard thing to fix. And so going into this ban list, if you are a good Sable player, I honestly think unless the meta really techs for you and has your number, Sable is still just fine. You don't need to figure out how to play Moosely Hot. You can. It's pretty similar, I'm understanding, but it's a weird note. Sable still gonna Sable. And with that, that's largely the end of the article. There's a note on side balance, and they're shouting out something that is, it does seem pretty weird on paper, is that corporations were barely hitting that win rate that they're looking for. And then in this ban list, they banned out 3 corporation cards and gave a runner a powerful card back, which seems to be the opposite of what you'd expect. They specifically say that Op and Alco are very resilient identities, and even knocking these cards out of it, they don't think that they're no longer top tier competitors or contenders. And so you are going to see Op and Alco decks for sure. They mentioned also Glacier lists. The meta is developing, and so maybe we see other decks like Leo finally winning a massive event. I think that would be sick. But their hope is specifically that runners need to continue to make trade-offs when preparing for the field, and they kind of want a wider field. So it's interesting for sure, and we'll see how it pays off. Of course, just pay attention when it comes to Worlds and you look at the results, whether that win rate swings back towards the runner side or not, because it kind of looks from the distance that might happen, but they're confident that this should open up the meta and maybe force people in different directions. I'm cautiously optimistic. Now, final note here, which is fascinating, that they're saying that the next ban list after the Edinburgh World Championship will be scheduled for Monday, November 17th, just a month after Worlds. There's always this like weird awkward period after Worlds before like the CBI at the beginning of January of next year, because there's no like organized competitive circuit. But yeah, there's an interesting point there you can look forward to. It's about 2 months away from now, a month away from Worlds. But look at the data from Worlds and make changes if changes need to be made. Speaking of changes, that's where we are. This is the 2510 ban list. It'll be operational as of October 3rd, and then quite ready for Worlds, of course. And with that, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this ban list. What are you the most excited for? I feel like I heard the most predictions of what this ban list would be. And if your predictions were accurate, I think you can go ahead and gloat for sure. But Edinburgh is only about a month away. We have 4 weeks or so for testing. And so if your meta deck is now going to have to change a fair bit, or whether you think a lane has been opened up for you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Again, a huge shout out to Null Signal Games for sharing this stuff ahead of schedule, so content creators like I can make videos like this. And if you like the video, if you want to leave a like on it, that's super appreciated. And with that, thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoy your 2510 ban list. Cheers. Hey, thanks so much for watching. As you probably know, I'm pretty excited about a targeted Nebula ban. That is quite nice for me, but I'm really looking forward to what Worlds looks like. The Continental season was fascinating, and seeing it continue to develop over the next 4 weeks is going to be a treat. And speaking about a treat, speaking about Worlds, I want to give a huge thank you to all these names here and more that support the Métropole Grid. That money is basically sending me to Worlds. I will be a volunteer doing some casting alongside Null Signal Games, and I'm super stoked to be part of it. It honestly would not be possible without the support of all these names here, and of course our Daily Cast patrons. If you want to support the channel, you can find a link below to the Patreon. Any amount of contribution is incredibly appreciated, but allows me to put the time into Netrunner to do all this sort of stuff and to travel, which is great. If you're in Edinburgh and you see me, I will be wearing, I assume, a blue shirt, but if you want to come up and please say hi, please do it. I know I look busy, I'm running around a lot, but I always have a second to stop and say hi to meet folks or re-meet folks that I've seen maybe years ago, or I know your handle online. Honestly, it's like the reason to go to these sort of events is to meet nice folks. So please don't be a stranger. I know I am a bit shy. With that, again, hopefully you have some good 4 weeks if you're preparing for Worlds to get some testing in. If you want to call your shot about what's good right now, the comments are just below. But otherwise, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Ciao.